From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there, and welcome to Chicago Newsroom here on Can TV. I'm Ken Davis. Welcome back to 2016's series of shows. We've been off for a couple of weeks, and what a couple of weeks it's been. I just happened to collect a few of the newspapers from the last, 10 days or so, each of which, I point out, has in it a breaking story or a new top to one of the stories about Chicago police, another very unfortunate, horrible shooting of a couple of people. Laquan McDonald updates the CPD in general, IPRA, Anita Alvarez, let's not forget Steve Patton. It just keeps going and going and going. And this would be a really good time to be a reporter dealing with this stuff. And it just so happens, when I look through all my Sun-Times, the name that comes up very often in the byline is this guy, Mick Dumke. I'm presuming that that's partly because you're a damn good reporter, but also because you're sort of like the lowest on the totem pole, so they made you work
I had to work through the holidays. I think it's much of the latter, Ken. Yeah.
You were the guy. And who would know that you would be the guy in the newsroom when two of the biggest data dumps in the last 10 years happened, because you got a press office that still thinks it's 1981 and you can deceive the media by dumping things on Christmas Eve or something, like they don't even know social media exists or something, I don't know. So hi, Mick Dumke.
Hey, Ken, how are you?
How you doing?
Happy New Year to you, too.
We got a lot to talk about today, but I should point out that you and Ben Joravsky do the best political show in Chicago, the second Tuesdays over at the Hideout, which this...
First Tuesdays.
It's our first Tuesday.
How can you think of us as second in anything, Ken? Come on.
Isn't that when elections are, the second Tuesday? No, I'm sorry, first Tuesdays. And it was a huge crowd this last week. And anyway, the reason I bring this up is because you do something that's really interesting. You have, you had Carol Marine and Marianne Childers, Marianne Ahern, sorry, on the show this week. And what you do is you talk to them a little bit about their own background. And we've had you on the show a million times, and I've never done that to you. So it's your turn, Ben Dumke. What is wrong with me? Maybe we should just start over here today. You now work at the Sun-Times, but before that you had a couple of hitches with the Reader, and you've worked at a bunch of other places. Is the Sun-Times your first daily metro newspaper assignment?
It is my first big city daily assignment. I worked for the daily newspaper in my hometown in Michigan, in St. Joe, Benton Harbor.
Is that where you're from?
I am from there, and there was a paper called the Herald Palladium. And at a lost time in my life, in my early 20s, didn't know quite what to do. I went back home and I was taking some classes, thinking I was going to be going to education, actually. And I started stringing for the local paper. I had been, this is more information you want or need, but I'd been way into journalism in high school. I was the editor of my high school paper. I went to college to study journalism and then promptly dropped out of the journalism school to study something even more practical, religion, and have 2 degrees in religion, and eventually went back to, I never could shake the writing and the journalism bug. But the long story short, I ended up stringing for the local paper in my hometown, and then I ended up getting a full-time job there, and I haven't really been able to get rid of journalism since.
So does it feel pretty cool to pick up the Sun-Times and see your name on the front page as a violin?
It still does. I'm not going to lie. I mean, you have to do this for more than your own glory, because first of all, there's actually not that much of it. Most people don't notice the name on the stories, I don't think, and especially in print, they don't see you or anything like that. But yeah, I still get, and that was true when I was at the Reader for all those years. It was true when I was at the Chicago Reporter before that. At every stop I've had, I still take great joy and pride in getting stuff out there and in the challenge to do something well. That because it's we never hit the mark quite, but we always keep trying.
Well, that's it. You're writing the first draft of history, so it's never exactly right, and that's what's so cool about it is, and especially in the environment that we're in today, that just because it has been frozen in time in this print medium, it's being updated every 5 minutes. And,
Absolutely.
And it's an amazing time to be in the business, and I'm very happy for you.
Yeah, and all we're doing is taking snapshots really along the way.
That's right. Yeah. So we should get started because there's a few things on the agenda
going
today.
on.
So as I said, you just happened to be around when these two massive data dumps happened, and the first one was audio, and you wrote about that. The Chicago police finally, I guess we could say, got around to releasing the audio of the dispatch tapes from the Laquan McDonald shooting.
Well, one of the things that was confusing, and we don't want to go too far into wonk land and FOIA land and all that kind of thing.
Oh, go ahead, wonk land.
But one of the things that was very confusing is who actually did release that information. A number of news organizations asked for the 911 call that precipitated the Laquan McDonald incident, as well as the dispatches, the radio calls back and forth with Office of Emergency Communications and the officers in their cars who responded. A number of organizations asked for it, and we were one of them. So in addition to being the low guy on the totem pole who was working over the holidays, I'm also one of the FOIA. Everybody sends out FOIAs at the newspaper, but I've been doing a lot of the FOIA stuff on this particular set of issues, and so I had been bothering the police department for weeks for copies of those audio recordings, and they waited quite a while to tell me they don't have them. They could have told me that the first day I sent in the request, but they waited at least 2 weeks, maybe more than 2 weeks, sent me over to the Office of Emergency Management Communications. OEMC. Said they have it. I FOIA'd OEMC, and I had a conversation with people at OEMC. Now you're going to release this to everyone at the same time, right? Because we're not the only ones, and I've been messed around with by the police department for 2 weeks, so when are you going to release this? And sometime soon we'll let you all know. Well, they didn't let us all know. They leaked it to 1 or 2 reporters the night before the evening of the 23rd of December.
This is news to me. I didn't know this.
There was something in the Politico wrap-up on the morning of Christmas Eve, and I believe that NBC, Carol Marine and some folks at NBC at least got word of it. And so there were some brief write-ups the morning of Christmas Eve. So I was at home getting ready for my work day when I saw this and was, as you can imagine, Ken,
agitated?
Rather agitated, happy that it was coming out for the public good, but very irritated because, again, I think this is all relevant. I think my woe is me story here is relevant because it has to do with transparency or the lack thereof by City Hall, which is at the center of this case ultimately.
I want to stay with this for just out here in the weeds for just a moment longer. Who did they leak it to?
It was Politico.
Oh, it was Politico.
My friend Natasha Korecki.
Okay,
I don't know if they leaked it to her or if she managed to get it first or got word of it, whatever, but I had been told by 2 different people who deal with the press at City Hall that they were going to let everyone know who had asked for this at the same time. And because everyone's, this is well-trod turf, Ken. Everybody wants some more information. And of course, under pressure, the city, the Emanuel administration has responded by saying, yes, we'll provide more information, but this is how they're doing it. And so
You're
anyway,
not being critical of the Emanuel administration, are you? Because
I've never done that before. Why
they're
would
the
I
most
start
transparent
now?
administration in history. I know, I've read their press release.
Exactly. But the bottom line is, it got my butt down to downtown on Christmas Eve, and basically we were told you can come over to the law department and pick up a CD-ROM with this information, which was news to me because as I've just spent time telling our audience, I had asked for this information from the police department, ask for it ask OEMC for it. You know, both of them hemming and hawing, we have it, don't have it, look to somebody else, and then it's the law department.
It's the law department.
That coughs it up. And
Which is something we're going to cycle back around to 2 or 3 times in this conversation today, I'm sure.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And short story, a similar kind of thing happened on New Year's Eve, except with all the email dump, except this time I don't think they did give it to anybody ahead of time. This time we were told, please just, come pick it up between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. on New Year's Eve. That's your window. Our window to be transparent is 4 hours. I got there at 10 to 9.
We're wiping a little hole in there. Yeah.
Exactly. I got there at 10 to 9. There's already one person, and soon there was a line of all of us, some of the usual suspects.
It's also, and I guess it is true that we could be geeking out about something here that the general public just couldn't give a damn about. But it's interesting to compare it also with the release of the Laquan McDonald video. I mean, I happened, on that occasion, I was just sitting watching it on TV like everybody else, and everybody was doing this dance like, well, we hope to be able to show you this video, but we're not exactly sure how we're going to get it. Are they going to give it to us online? And it took hours, and I think it was in the wrong format. It was an unbelievable mess. And we constantly hear about the sophistication of the Rahm Emanuel Press operation and how it's so above and beyond everything else that we've ever seen. And yet, whether it's creative incompetence or just plain out incompetence, it just seems to me that, as I mentioned jokingly at the top of the show, I just sit here and I just kind of like shake my head and think, these tactics worked in 1983 when it was important what was on the front page of that newspaper.
Or 1968 when Richard Nixon was running for president.
But it's like, do they not know about this internet thing?
And these are all great questions, Ken. I think something within the emails that was very clear is that what we all suspected all along about sort of City Hall's obsession, the mayor, and we presume the mayor, because by the way, there weren't emails from the mayor in all those 3,000 pages of emails that were released. The mayor was referenced a few times. There were a few blacked out things, could have been the mayor, but there weren't any emails from the mayor. But what we learned from those emails was that what we suspected about their obsession with the way, the city's and the mayor's image is presented in public, that is very much true and alive. But I think to your point, something like this happened, they clearly weren't prepared for the build-up into the crisis that it remains, and that is reflected in these emails where they are really just tripping over each other to try to figure out how possibly to keep up, let alone to get ahead of it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've mentioned on the show before that in my brief little foray into working in the press office under a different mayor.
Who shall not be named.
I can't remember his name. It's so weird. But one of the things we were taught is that email is for good news and phone calls are for bad news. You never, I can't tell you how many times I was told, never create a document unless you want everybody in the world to read that document when it gets FOIA'd. And that's the way it is.
Yeah, the last emperor of Ethiopia, Haile Selassie, had the same philosophy, never wrote anything down. Everything was word of mouth. If you ever read up about that regime.
So one of the things that you and all the rest of you ragtag reporters who are always trying to make trouble have sort of made clear is that there is coordination between the mayor's office, the police, IPRA, the state's attorney's office, everybody. They all have these little conference calls and they decide what to do. You're not shocked, are you, to find out that the mayor's press office coordinates everybody to make sure everybody's on the same page?
I'm not shocked, but again, this is like written, documented evidence of things that we may have believed all along, but here it is in print, and it's particularly, this isn't just, crafting your message, this isn't just making sure we're on the same page, the right hand, the left hand together, all that kind of thing. When we were talking about the Independent Police Review Authority, focus on the word independent, which is so named, so named that way by the mayor we just had, who shall not be named, during a previous crisis, and
that was his solution.
That was his solution, was create independent
right.
police. So them and the state's attorney, who keeps stressing over and over again how independent she is, and she is conducting an investigation free of pressure, and these sorts of things. So when you see evidence that they're having discussions about what to tell the media together, you know, I think that's pretty damning.
The one particular email that I think you stressed was December 5th of 2014, so that would have been about a year ago, from Scott Ando, who was the Independent Police Review Authority's head at the time, who sent a message over to the mayor's office saying that there were probably 24 hot cases of one sort or another, and kind of like giving them a heads up that, hey, this is only, you think this is bad, you know, you should see what I see.
Yeah, and it appeared in those emails that aides to the mayor had asked him for updates or the status, how many of these kinds of cases are open, and he provided an update. And when we asked the city about that, they said, well, you know, if you look in the ordinance governing IPRA, it says that they're supposed to provide, you know, reports to the mayor and to the public and what they're doing. I don't think that the ordinance, I read it, I don't think the ordinance intended for them to provide the status of investigations from an independent body that is looking into potential misconduct or criminal activity.
I mean, one would think, although, you know, we do live in Chicago, but one would think that an independent review authority would not have to answer questions to the police or to the mayor's office about what they're investigating.
Not have to, and potentially should not, I would say. And so for them to be saying, yeah, this particular officer, this particular case is being looked at by the state's attorney, this one we think is being looked at by the U.S. attorney, it just, you know, I think it at the very least it raises questions about how appropriate that particular you know, series of exchanges is, as well as, again, the independence. Is this really an agency that was walled off to conduct independent investigations?
I really want to steer clear of putting you in the position of asking you for opinions. I don't want to do that to you. But the thing that, I mean, maybe I can express an opinion and you can like arch your eyebrow or something, I don't know. But it seems to me that the press office is not serving this mayor particularly well at this point, because it is so clear that the things that they're doing are not transparent, for one thing, that they're highly defensive, and that they are, I would say, exacerbating the problem and adding to the perception that the mayor's office is in a bunker mentality. And I don't get it. I don't understand their messaging. It just doesn't seem to be working for me. But
well, you know, I think Ben Jarofsky, my friend, former colleague,
who can and
show
does express
collaborator,
opinion,
he's been known to. I think he actually even mentioned this on the show that we had earlier this week, where he was saying, you know, his argument, well, these are people paid by taxpayers. At one point in time, we used to call them public information officers. That tag has been removed.
Yeah, I was one of those. Yeah,
right, and because they really don't, that's no longer their primary purpose, to provide information to the media or the public. I mean, they in large part, their function, and this isn't an opinion. Well, they'll probably argue that it is, but what I've seen is that they're political. They're basically political operators. They are part of, as you said, a message. I mean, one of the people on these emails who's kind of leading some of these conversations about how to handle the situation, on her LinkedIn page, she says she's the director of strategic messaging for the city of Chicago. That really sounds like that is obviously a PR operation, arguably a political PR operation. And about whether they're doing what, you know, they're serving the administration well, that's a different question. Like, what is their purpose? I don't know that, obviously they're going to serve the administration, Ken. I'm not naive, that is what they do now, but, you know, we elect the mayor, you know, we did elect the mayor. We have a right to some information, and I think that's where they've really failed. And you're right, there's a bunker mentality that's been created, and people are leveling charges, pointing fingers at them. Even Scott Ando, we just got done saying how he had passed on this information. When we got a hold of him on New Year's Eve, talked to us for a few minutes, he said everything had to be cleared with City Hall, with what I did. And I think a lot of the problems that have ensued would have, been cleared up right away if we'd been able to talk candidly.
Yeah. And obviously this is something that's of great interest to me because, as someone who's been in kind of both places to observe it. I'm babbling, but I think the question does get to what is the role of the mayor's press staff? Right.
Are they just channeling selected information to the press? Are they providing information to the public? Are they looking out for their guy? And it's
interesting to me because we really saw this in a big way when Becky Carroll was the director of communications for CPS, and J.C. Brizard was there. I know Becky. I have incredible respect for her. I worked with her before. But what we saw was when J.C. Brizard was gone and open to speak freely, he essentially said, I wasn't running the place, she was. Because the decisions that had anything to do with policy were coming at me through the press office. They were setting the agenda, not me.
Well, and that's the other part of this, is that how much policy is involved versus how much strategic messaging is involved.
Right,
and from the beginning of this mayor's time in office, the strategic messaging has been in full gear. And it certainly appears both in the instance of the schools in this crisis. There are other examples where the messaging has dictated the policy insofar as there is a coherent policy. Now, all this, I should be fair and say, before coming over here, Ken, just got done with a conversation with a city press liaison who set up a great interview with a city official. My colleague Chris Fusco and I had. There are people who work very hard and are fair and are straightforward. Right. When they can't get the information, they are straight about it. So I don't want to paint with a broad brush.
I think it's really important to differentiate here that we're not really talking about the individuals.
We're not talking about the gatekeepers.
We're talking about this kind of this overarching policy that seems to have been imposed on the whole thing, that press aides are part of the political structure.
And does it come from the mayor? Does it come from press aides who want to satisfy and impress the mayor? Right, is they feeling pressure that's not there? Yeah. I mean, we kind of have seen how Rahm operates, so you have to assume that a lot of this is coming from the mayor. But
rightly so. I think some viewers might be saying, will you shut up talking about the stuff that you guys are interested in and talk about what's really going on out there in the world? We had this horrible shooting of Quintonio Legrier and Betty Jones. The funeral was just yesterday as we speak today. What I found really interesting about the coverage of this and the subsequent discussion about it is that when we heard, am I confusing this? We've heard the audio tapes of that one, have we not?
We haven't.
We have not. But what we've heard is that there was no discussion in the dispatch and in the original 911 call saying that this guy Quintonio had mental health problems. So is it reasonable to expect that the officers drove up to the situation not knowing that this was possibly a mental health issue?
Well, I honestly, I just don't know what they knew. Mm-hmm. I mean, we don't have that information. There were two 911 calls, apparently one from Quintonio and one from his father. And so they were obviously having some sort of situation between them, and one of them called for assistance, and the other one called for assistance, and so I would presume, based on that alone, that the officers were told there was a domestic situation with two separate calls about, and so they're supposed to go into a domestic situation and which is very complicated, by the way, and I don't know.
Incredibly complicated.
Exactly. So they had to have known that, but what else they knew or didn't know, Ken, we're still waiting to hear.
I guess it's normal for us not to know, and because we're in such a hyper-heated environment right now, these things take on a different level of importance. But it is normal for us not to have a full description of exactly what happened out there, but how Betty Jones was killed, was she actually behind a door? Was she shot through, as the family says, they shot through the door and killed her? I mean, we just really don't know any facts at all, right, about this?
We know very few, and we know even fewer from the police department. We know a few more that, yes, attorneys for the families have revealed, or in some cases the family members themselves have revealed. Supposedly shell casings were found as far out on the sidewalk, which would suggest the officer was at least a little bit of distance away, raising questions about whether he felt, really was under threat from the bat right then, and so forth and so on. But honestly, most of this is speculation. The attorneys are obviously going to do their part to represent their clients and and to put that information out, and I'm not questioning their integrity. I'm just saying this is the way the process works.
That's the normal way. Jumping around a little bit, going back to Laquan McDonald, one of the things that is now, I think, pretty much settled from listening to the audio tapes of the dispatch is that the first cops, the first responders to the Laquan McDonald thing appear to be very calm.
They do.
I mean, even when he punctures the tire on the car, their concern is just, will somebody please bring us a taser out here?
Right.
We want to try to take care of this.
We want to try to take care of this. They reported that in a matter-of-fact fashion. The 911 dispatcher, when the first 911 call came in that there was an individual who was reportedly breaking into a truck yard and trying to steal radios, the 911 dispatcher was so matter of fact that when I listened to it, I thought that he was rude. He was just kind of like, all right. We hear ya, we'll send an officer. It was sort of that kind of a tone. And then the first officer was out there, followed him for several blocks and was sort of matter-of-factly reporting, giving the play-by-play. And you're right, Ken, asked for a taser repeatedly. The dispatcher said, anybody in the area have a taser? Someone said they were coming from, I think it was like 5 miles away. And then all of a sudden it goes from calm to very quickly like that.
I'm 2 blocks away.
I'm 2 blocks away, and then within a minute, police shooting. So within a minute, these officers drove that 2 blocks, supposedly got out of the car, and then started shooting.
And that we've seen from the video, so I mean, that's not disputed, that there was almost no time. There were literally seconds.
Well, I don't know that we saw that much in the video of the lead up to the shooting. We saw the shooting itself and how that unfolded, but we didn't see that much in the lead up, which is why the audio is so important.
This is a very sensitive question, but do you know, or does anybody know, these first officers who appear to be so calm and so professional and in control, were they officers who filed reports on the thing saying, basically backing up Van Dyke?
That's a really good question.
We don't know that yet,
I don't know if we know that. I don't know if we've seen that.
To me, that's a really horrible situation, because if that turns out to be the case, then we really see in stark relief how this code of silence thing really works. And you guys had a very interesting conversation about this the other night, that I'd like to carry on talking about a little bit, about the code of silence in journalism, the code of silence in lawyers, doctors. Everybody has a code of silence. And of course, that also takes into account the idea that we've talked so often about the lack of video, the lack of audio, the Burger King tapes, and all of that kind of stuff. It ties into something in what's today's paper about 22 officers having been disciplined for not using their video. And after the disciplines, including some mandatory time off or whatever it was, all of a sudden the upload rate increases by 75% in the matter of days. I mean, how do you read that?
Well, we've been told all along that this is a combination of will and technology. And what I mean by that, obviously, is stuff doesn't work if you don't turn it on. And Frank Main, who wrote or co-wrote that story in today's paper, he and I, a couple weeks ago, wrote a story about how there's all sorts of problems with the functionality of the equipment. which is, again, that's the technology part. But the will part, we reported that up in Jefferson Park, there were a couple officers who were found to have thrown their microphones onto the roof of the station.
It was more than a couple, wasn't it?
Well, we had heard, I think we had heard that there was a fairly significant number, and then able to talking to some people got confirmation that I think it was just a couple in the end.
Okay.
But we had heard that there were there was a larger number. That's
police
unconfirmed.
officers just throwing their audio
throwing
systems
it on the
up
roof.
onto the roof.
As a really good source I have out there said, I don't know why you would throw it onto the roof if you're protesting this. Why would you say
Maybe
throw it
not a lot
into the
of thought
sewer?
went into
Yeah,
it,
I think it's so. But that to me was illustrative. It was just kind of like, to hell with this.
Yeah.
So there obviously, that's out there. I myself have, written about how the police department has engaged in spying or eavesdropping or tracking of protest groups. And I had a postcard from someone who signed it officer friendly and said, well, how would you like it if I put a mic on you and we recorded you all day at work? And so, I think that feeling is not limited to Mr. Officer Friendly.
I think I take that point, and I think they raise some interesting issues. But there are a couple of responses to it. The first is that I believe that for whatever you want to call them, good cops, this is the best friend they've got. I mean, there are already, they don't get as much press, but there are a lot of videos that have kind of surfaced in the last few months of police officers being in horrendous situations and coming out like heroes. And the body camera told us a story about what it's like to be a police officer in those situations that we just can't even begin to understand as civilians. So it can work both ways. That's point number one. But point number two is that it is a little bit different. There is a double standard. A police officer has lethal force. A police officer has arrest powers that you or I don't have, and therefore it is not unreasonable for us as citizens to expect of them a level of accountability for what they do that's higher than even for a reporter, sad to say. But I think that's fair. I don't think it's a fair question to say, well, what if we just put a mic on you all day long?
Well, I agree with you, Ken. I mean, and I think that a lot of police officers would agree with what you're saying too. What I've heard over and over again from cops I've talked with about this is, yes, but we need to see and the public needs to see more examples of how it's used other than charging somebody with murder for it. Right. And, a lot of officers, I think even officers who are really upset about what happened that night, a lot of them still kind of feel like, well, what if I make a mistake? You have this on video and then I'm charged with murder next. And, I don't think it's going to go from here to here to here, but they're really, I think a lot of very thoughtful police officers are very concerned in this environment. There's a whole, the pendulum is shifting so far to the other side that things can be used against them. I think you're right, Ken. I hope you're right, and I hope that people increasingly, as part of this very important conversation we're having across the country about criminal justice, I hope people really stop and think about what we ask police officers to deal with. Yeah. We're just talking about a domestic situation, people who are mentally unstable, many of whom are actually dangerous or could be dangerous. We send police in to deal with all sorts of long festering social issues and say, well, let's send a cop in. By the time that happens, it's we're at the end of a long, complicated, difficult situation.
I do think that we're at a pivotal time in our nation's history, in the world's history. Again, it's just another one of those things that the internet is uprooting or destroying, depending on your point of view. But I think there's going to be a generational shift. In 20 years, police officers who are coming on the force now this will just have been routine for them.
Right.
And they will see it very differently than people of my age do, you can take this as a criticism if you want, but until now, the police force has been fairly autonomous and fairly unaccountable. And accountability is just coming to all of us now. I mean, we've talked about the journalism thing. It's like, if you make a mistake now, it's out there. If you make a mistake in a story, it is debated on the internet for the next 2 hours, and and
it's out there forever.
Everyone can see it.
And people have any number of ways to get a hold of you. Right. They can easily find where you work and where you live, for that matter.
So we just live in a different world. We live in a world where everyone can be a part of everything, and it's a kind of a cool time to be alive, if you ask me. Now, one of the things that this raises is this issue of the mayor cuts short his vacation, dramatically spends a lot of money to get off Cuba, off the island, and come home in a chartered flight. And I read somewhere yesterday someone saying, every complex issue has a simple solution. It's just that it's the wrong solution. And we may be seeing some of this happening here. The mayor comes back, does an exhaustive evaluation of the situation, and says, okay, we're going to buy 700 new tasers, and we're going to train the cops. Well, first of all, only 16% of the Chicago Police Department, as I understand it from what I've read, is trained to deal with mental health victims. And yet, so many of the people they have to deal with are mental health cases, because we closed the mental health clinics and all the rest of that. So there's a training issue. Only 21% of Chicago police officers are trained on tasers. So there's another issue. And it's not something that I think you just kind of go to a 40-minute class in a, or you take a webinar or something and you're trained. I mean, these are really complicated, very up to the second kind of decisions people have to go through. So you're going to need continual training all the time. We think nothing of sending people out to the gun range every whatever it is, a few months or whatever it is, to be up on that. So where's the money going to come from for that? How do you do this kind of continual training? And finally, the last part of my speech is that Steve. I'm sorry, I just forgot his name, Tribune editorial board, wrote a piece the other day saying a bad cop with a taser is still a bad cop. And these are the issues that are being raised here. There's probably nothing left for you to say after I've made this speech.
Well done, Ken.
But training, I mean, how do you deal with training when there's no money and you have a police force that appears to be recalcitrant for the training?
Well, I think the money thing is really important. One of the officers I was mentioning when I was just doing calls and check-ins with people, I know what I think when I see this video, my reaction, I'm talking to other people with their reaction, what are police officers I know, what are they thinking about this whole situation? But one of them, Ken, said to me that very thing. He said, look, I would love more training. I would love it if we have better equipment. He said, you don't realize, but our equipment is crap. Now, cops, just like journalists and I assume other professions, they love to bitch and complain about their circumstances.
Exactly.
Right. But he said, look, we would love better equipment. We'd love more training. It's going to cost money. Are you willing to pay for that? Right. So that's the first question. The second thing is, what kind of police force do we want? And that's what I was getting at with sort of the broader philosophical question. 20 plus years ago, when the city started to implement community policing, which they never fully implemented, by the way. But once they started community policing, the CAPS program, there was a pushback from officers who said, I didn't come here to be a social worker. Right. And so when you're talking about mental health training and stuff, well, they aren't trained to be social workers. Right. So maybe what we're talking about is a new kind of responding officer, or within the force, you have all sorts of different divisions within the police force. You have specialized divisions who just work on burglaries. You have a marine unit. Maybe you have a mental health unit in every
It's not a perfect analogy, but very similar kind of things have happened with the fire department. It used to be a bunch of guys who went and put out fires. Now it's a bunch of guys who go and rescue people who are having heart attacks and put fires out once in a while.
And if someone's having a heroin overdose, they take the antidote for that, and so forth and so on. The point is, all this is evolving for first responders, and so I think I'm hopeful that that police officers and the leadership of a police department will help lead us into this discussion and hopefully resolution, or at least an ongoing update of what the police department should be, what police officers should be, what they should expect to be responded to. So we're not just sending guys out who are trained to respond to force with force. If that's what they're trained to do, and we send them into these other situations, what do you think is going to happen?
Can we jump a couple of things here? Steve Patton has just sort of vaulted into the news. He's the Corporation Counsel. But it appears that he is sort of like the manipulator behind the scenes in so many of these stories. He's kind of like a glue that ties all these things together, because there's talk about expanding the Justice Department probe to the Corporation Counsel because of as many as 5 lawyers being cited for withholding evidence in various police trials. And there was this whole discussion about whether or not he acted behind the scenes to cut the legs off of McCarthy. I'm sure that McCarthy got himself a nice favorable thing in Snead about, how he was really trying to reform the department, but Patton cut him.
Not just in Snead.
Cut him down, right? Yeah. But you know what I'm saying? It's like Steve Patton really seems to be this guy who is doing a lot of the kind of heavy lifting behind the scenes for Rahm Emanuel.
Well, I mean, he is the city's top lawyer. Some of this stuff is within his, clearly within his job description.
But it was his office that released the audio.
A lot of, I think the FOIA stuff is going now, especially the big FOIA stuff is clearly going through the city's law department. Mm-hmm. Maybe that was always the case, but now it's much more transparent, to use an overused word, that's how it's working. I forgot what your initial question was.
Well, just about the news stories that have been breaking about withholding evidence.
Well, it's clearly troubling that city lawyers aren't following court rules. This comes down to court rules about when there's a discovery process in a case. One side asks for certain evidence, the other side is, assuming there's judicial approval, is required to produce that evidence. And if you say that you are producing the evidence and you're not, I mean, that is obviously a major problem. Our justice system is built on, an honest recounting of the facts. Now, with the 5 lawyers cited, I think the Tribune we had the one this week who, in a case where the judge just came out and did a real smackdown and ordered a new trial and called out the lawyer by name. And then I think the Trib has come up with, or some others have come up with these other cases. My question about that is that sounds like a lot. It's more, 0 is the ideal number. But how often does this happen in private practice? How often does it happen? I mean, what is the context here? We're shining a spotlight on this now, and all of us are looking at this with wide eyes, but is this something that happens? How many of these are mistakes? How many of these are deliberate? How many of these is there evidence where it was deliberate and where they're playing games? I think those are all important questions. And so, to me, why wouldn't there be additional scrutiny of the law department and the way they're doing business? And if they're doing it the way they should, and even if they're not doing it the way they should, I would think they would, in this environment, welcome to have the backup and someone else helping them do what they do better. I mean, that's the goal.
We talked earlier about Natasha Karecki in Politico, and I see that today she's got a story that Preckwinkle is going to push the Cook County Democratic Party to endorse Kim Foxx. At first, she was successful in getting them to withhold the endorsement from Alina Alvarez. This sounds like a pretty big political deal.
Yeah, it potentially is. The state's attorney's race, obviously, there are protesters out in the streets calling for the resignation of the state's attorney. She's up for re-election in a couple months here. People who want to change in direction have an opportunity to weigh in. But you're right, Ken, this is I think, with all due respect to the Senate, U.S. Senate, that esteemed body of the U.S. Senate and the candidates, I think that the state's attorney's race here is going to be the sort of the hottest or the most watched local race for sure.
So you have a Hispanic woman, you have a black woman, you have a white woman.
Exactly. And
Donna Moore just announced yesterday formally that she's running. We'll have her on the show in 2 weeks, by the way.
There you go. Great. And, more importantly, I think you have an incumbent in a very important and powerful position, and you have two seemingly credible challengers. And so, there's been a lot of dissatisfaction with Anita Alvarez, certainly over the last 4 years. But you're right, Ken, when the slating session was held by the Cook County Democratic Party last summer, despite a push by Tony Preckwinkle and others to endorse, there were pressures to not endorse Anita Alvarez, but that is almost, just so everyone understands how the sausage is made politically, to not endorse an incumbent is almost unheard of.
Yeah,
we've endorsed people who've been under indictment. We've endorsed people
who are dead.
Yeah, exactly. So a living, breathing, active office holder who also happens to be a Latina, very powerful, important constituency. So it was a sign of trouble for the state's attorney when she did not get the endorsement, and so now to hear that Tony Preckwinkle is pushing for her former chief of staff to get the endorsement outright. It's definitely big political news, but I think, as Natasha pointed out, she's right on the money. I think this cuts both ways. The major criticism, if you're just talking politically about Kim Foxx, is that she's too close to Tony Preckwinkle, and that this office, which we just took pains earlier in the show to discuss how that is supposed to be and should be independent, to have basically that be an aide or auxiliary potentially of the president's office is troubling to a lot of people.
There's a highly recommended reading. Carol Felsenthal in the Chicago Magazine blog did a long interview with the state's attorney, and she says, I've done nothing wrong, and really launches a full-bore attack on Tony Preckwinkle and says, all this is really about is Tony Preckwinkle wants to control this office, and I won't let her because I'm an independently...
And she's been saying that for almost since Tony Preckwinkle got into office, which is 6 years ago, going on 6 years ago now. So that actually wasn't new. I thought it was pretty striking. Her quote, "I've done nothing wrong." That is a pretty low and pathetic bar for the chief criminal justice authority in the county to say I've done nothing wrong.
I keep going back to my days.
A reason for anyone to vote.
I keep going back to my days as a public information officer. My advice to you is not to say I've done nothing wrong. It looks like I am not a crook.
And exactly, and that actually surprised me because say what you will about Anita Alvarez and her chief media aide, Sally Daly, who's a veteran at this. They're usually very disciplined in their own way about the issues they're pushing.
I don't blame Sally Daly for this one. It just popped out of her mouth.
That sounded like something said in frustration that she immediately probably regretted saying.
In fact, actually, that was my first thought was, oh, poor Sally, look what she just said.
Yeah.
But anyway, but we digress. One other quick thing here, and it's not quick, but one of the criticisms, of course, is that the state's attorney's office is too close with the police department, that they require, in order to operate, they need to have a multi-level, multi-layered, very close working relationship with the police department. So when a cop gets in trouble, there's a kind of, the saying goes, there's a kind of a bias in favor of the police.
Well, that certainly is what it appears to have been the case over time when we're talking about how few of these cases have ended up being, officers receiving any sort of reprimand, and certainly when it gets to the prosecution point, there seems to be very little of it. Yeah. But I think IPRA was supposed to have helped with this. IPRA was supposed to have performed an independent investigation and pushed, and sent its findings over to the state's attorney's office, which then, of course, would conduct its own investigation, but at least there would be some sort of intermediary, independent step there, and that has clearly failed. I mean, there's always going to be tension, Ken. The other thing is, the police chiefs and police officers are not elected. The state's attorney is. So, Anita Alvarez, for most of her career, was a tough on crime prosecutor, talking a lot about locking up gangbangers and bad guys. And over the last year, she's talking about all the reforms she's brought to the office because the times have changed. So like every elected official, you know, she is both trying to enforce the law, but she's also trying to convince us all with that she's worthy of our support again. So the police department is not supposed to be, you know, subject to the whims of, you know, the voters day in and day out. So there's always going to be some tension in their missions.
You know, it wasn't until really a couple of weeks ago, I'm embarrassed to admit, that there's a fundamental piece of this whole process that I guess I've never really understood. If I get arrested and I've done something terrible, who actually charges me? Is it the police department? I get charged with something, right? I get arraigned, I go to court and all that. But where is this connection between the police department and the state's attorney's office? Who makes the decisions?
Well, if we're just talking about felony cases, the police will make the arrest, obviously, and they will, I guess, charge you with certain things. But to bring a formal charge in court, to bring a criminal case against you, the state's attorney does that, as I understand it.
So the police recommends to the...
Essentially, they're recommending it. You know, they have to cite reasons, obviously, for holding you, for arresting you, and all that kind of thing. So they are collecting evidence, and then they are essentially forwarding that, and then all felony cases except drug cases have to be approved by the state's attorney, or reviewed by the state's. I mean, they all have to be approved by the state's attorney, but the state's attorney reviews all of the evidence on felony cases, except in drug cases. They've traditionally just go ahead and brought charges regardless. So.
I'm embarrassed to say that after all these years, that's something that I guess I never really paid much attention to or really thought about. It's like, I guess I've always kind of believed that, well, the police just charge you and then you show up in court. But that's not
and
the
I'm not
case.
an attorney either, so I'm describing it as I understand it, and the legal experts out there can write you angry letters or and tell us if
they
we
will
got it
clarify,
wrong.
I'm sure. There's one other speech that I have to make here, and it's something that we've talked about on the show a number of times, and it has to do with the Burger King tapes, which I consider to be a really, really big deal. And I got to tell you that I think it's time for legislation that clearly delineates and clarifies under what circumstances a police department can examine or even touch a privately owned surveillance system. I mean, let's say that they didn't do anything wrong, okay? That they called in a technical expert who sat there for a couple of hours playing with the computer, but he didn't actually delete anything. Then I think that what needs to happen is that a complete log of everything that goes on, including the wearing of a body camera, needs to happen anytime the police investigate a private video system. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, you're asking and then should we videotape the guy who's videotaping the guy? No, I'm kidding you, but no, you make a good point. I mean, obviously, first of all, to be fair, we don't actually. There has been no evidence that it was tampered with. The tape has these gaps for the entire time of Laquan McDonald, but I think it has gaps for longer than that too. It's not like the Nixon tapes where mysteriously, you know, this minute or 2 minutes here were obviously erased.
Although the Burger King tech guy disputes that, so.
He does.
You know,
well, yeah.
We can't know.
We don't know. All I'm saying is, I mean, obviously I have my suspicions too, lots of questions about that. We'd all like to know the answers. I'm just saying the evidence we have and what we don't have. Yeah. But to your broader point, Ken, I honestly don't know what rules govern the police handling of that stuff. Do they not have to get a warrant to review it? I actually don't know that. Yeah. I would think that.
Well, they didn't in this case, that's for sure.
Apparently not.
And you know, I'm not really making a big deal out of the Burger King thing, because I think we all understand that even if these tapes were in perfect condition and we all watched them, they don't actually show anything new.
Right.
Probably wouldn't advance the case. But we've seen 4, 5, 6 other cases where it's clear that the Chicago police interfered with video surveillance systems, but there's video of them looking for the video system, and in other cases, and it just seems to me that needs to end on our favorite word, more transparent.
I'm all for and showing and releasing the videos in a timely and appropriate manner would be helpful too.
Yeah. We've run a little over time, Mick, and I really appreciate you hanging around.
No, it's great to be here. There's so much to talk about. We could keep going.
Yes.
Thanks to you for having me on. And thanks
but
to
we've run
watching.
out of digital space. Our cameras are full. We'll have to talk again another time, and of course I recommend people to come to your show at the Hideout on the first Tuesday of every month, and to read you in the Chicago Sun-Times. It's a pleasure having you here, and thanks so much.
Thanks, Ken.
You have been watching Chicago Newsroom. It is a very long presentation of CAN TV, and we're very pleased that we're able to go a little bit over time today, and thank you very much for watching. We'll be back again next week with another conversation. We're going to talk to Eitan Mikhaili next week about his huge and wonderful book about the Defender and the role that the Chicago Defender has had in shaping Chicago over the last 100 years or so. Hope you'll join us for that. I'm Ken Davis. Thanks to the crew here, and thanks to everybody else. We'll see you next week on Chicago Newsroom. Bye-bye.